What do we do? Just sit there?
You don't need to do anything. So, oh, we already have a few attendees. I see folks coming in. Welcome. I see names popping up on the list here. So nice to see folks. We will be getting started in just a few minutes. And for those of you who are joining us, you are welcome to open up the chat on your Zoom screen. And we also have a Q&A button, so you'll be able to enter questions. Later on in the program, we'll have a question and answer session. So you can enter them now, enter during the talk, or enter later as they come to you as well. We've got some folks starting to say hello. Hello, Edgar, welcome.
That's my neighbor. Oh, okay. We planted people in the audience, Lily. Oh, Deborah Sozin. Yeah, okay. They're all very chatty. People can stay in their air-conditioned. Yeah. If we had to go to Brookline tonight, it would not be pleasant.
So nice. Every time I look back at the number of attendees, more people are joining us. This is so nice.
Good.
Welcome everyone who's coming in. Just joining us, we have a chat box that is open, so you're welcome to say hello. There's also, if you move your mouse to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A, question and answer button, that you can use throughout this event to ask questions. Hello from Toby and Newton. Hello, welcome. It's nice to see so many folks here. Yes, we do have one question from Dan. So wait, I do see your question in the chat.
Let me get into the chat.
Yeah, this is just asking if we can hear them. So no, this session is set up as a Zoom webinar. So that means that our presenters have microphones and cameras, but everyone in the audience does not. So we encourage you to say hello through the chat or ask questions in that Q&A box. But we won't be able to hear people in the audience.
My friends from all over the country. So nice.
It's one of the wonderful things about these online programs.
That is.
It's nice. We get to connect with local folks and people all over.
Yeah, so you should definitely talk about your Zoom programs.
Oh, absolutely, yes. As we'll give folks another minute or so to come in, but I will paste our library events calendar into the chat. So you're welcome to take a look at that. We are doing all online programs these days at the Public Library of Brookline, and we have programs for adults like this one, and we have programs for kids and for folks of all ages as well. More greetings as well, folks saying hi.
Yeah, so nice.
Welcome everyone. And I'll do another quick just orientation to how the setup is, and then I think we'll get started. Sure. So for folks joining us, this session is set up as a Zoom webinar. So if you've been in Zoom meetings, this might look a little bit different to you. So in a Zoom webinar, we have cameras and microphones for our presenters, but not for folks in the audience. So everyone is invited to say hello with the chat, which you can open on your screen. There's also, if you move your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. So you'll be able to type in questions during the program. Right. I think we'll get started. I will just give a brief introduction and then let Robin and Hanni take it away. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this online program at the Public Library of Brookline. I'm so thrilled this evening to introduce Robin Stein and Hanni Myers, who will be telling us how they collaborated to create the book My Two Cities. In My Two Cities, author Robin Stein tells the story of Hanni Myers' escape from 1938 Austria and immigration to America. They will be discussing how they work together to tell this story, how past immigration stories relate to the present, and the importance of preserving personal histories. So after they speak, Robin and Hanni will be answering questions. So I mentioned the Q&A button. Please feel free to type your questions in either during their talk or after in the Q&A. We'll be answering the questions during the Q&A, but you're welcome to type them in at any point. Also, if anyone is interested in purchasing a copy of My Two Cities, you can write to Robin directly to buy a copy, and I will be pasting her email address into the chat. So you can write to her there. I'll do it now, and I will add it in again later as well. So without further ado, welcome Robin and Hanni.
Thank you, Lily. It's so great to hear that all of you are here. I can't see you, and it's probably the hottest night of the summer, so it's good that we're on Zoom and not in person. Hanni and I were supposed to give this talk in May in person, but intervening events happened, so we're here now. I'd like to thank Lily Weitzman and Jessica Staler of the Brookline Public Library for putting all this together. The world has changed a lot since Hanni and I started our book, and we're going to address that a little tonight. Hanni, you want to say a few words of intro?
Well, we met, we just decided that we met 3 years ago, and I was speaking at the Scandinavian Living Center. There was people were giving talks about memoirs, and Robin picked up on the fact that my doll, Lily, I've had since I'm 6 years old. So, and I still have her. I'm going to show you Lily. This is Lily.
Hi, Lily. She looks very good for her age, Hanni.
She does.
Yeah.
She had a little facelift because we took her to have new hair put on. Yeah. So, well, Robin and I sat together for many sessions to discuss how to write the book, and it's a children's book. So I think the ideas for children, maybe, what do you think, Robin, between the ages of 7 and 11, maybe?
Yes, but we should say that teenagers and adults have embraced this book too.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, children could read it by themselves. Yeah. So when we wrote it, we didn't want to put anything frightening in about the Holocaust. So we just, I think, just said that there was a war coming. But I would like to tell you a little bit more about what really happened in Vienna leading up to our leaving.
I just want to say one thing, honey. That one of the reasons you wanted to tell your story, you told me, was to benefit immigrants coming to this country today, particularly children, to give them some hope and optimism and guidance. So I just add that. Now tell your story.
Well, I was 8 years old when Hitler invaded Austria. And so everything is from the point of view of a child's memory. On that very first day, my sister and I were in a dance recital. And I remember my mother went with us, and when we got to the hall, there was hardly anyone there. When we went back on the streetcar, we noticed that the men had turned the lapels of their coats to show the swastika, and that's the first time that I saw swastika. So that evening, there were airplanes flying overhead, and then the Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg gave his speech saying that in order to avoid bloodshed, he's allowing the Germans to come in. My family consisted of my parents, my older sister Susie, who was 3.5 years older than I, and we lived in the 4th district in Vienna in an apartment house on the 3rd floor, which overlooked the park called the Dacia Park. I think my father was a physician. I think probably we were pretty well off. I mean, we had a cook and a maid and all kinds of help. So what happened in Germany took 5 years, between 1933 and 38, for laws and to come against the Jews. But in Vienna, it only took 5 days. So the next day, we were not allowed anymore to play in the park or to sit on the benches there. And I think for an 8-year-old, it was hard when the kids that you had been playing with, the non-Jewish kids, had to turn their backs to us because the parents were afraid to have them speak to a Jew. We couldn't go to school anymore, which we didn't mind that much at the time. So down on the ground floor of our apartment building, there was a preschool, a Jewish preschool that I had actually attended. One day we went to my Uncle Eric's house in another part of the city, and our cook called on the telephone and said, "Don't come home because the SS is here and they're plundering the kindergarten. They've thrown everything out on the street." So my father went first to check it all out, see if it was safe for us to come back. And the upshot was that the SS established their headquarters downstairs in our apartment house. My doll, Lily, this is a story about Lily, and I had her very tightly wrapped in all kinds of blankets, and we always played on the balcony. Balcony went around, it was a corner apartment, so it was always played on the balcony. Downstairs on the ground floor with SS on long tables, drinking beer and singing. And I don't know how it happened. I dropped Lily. And my mother said, "If you're very polite, you can go down and get the doll." And, you know, this was in the early days. I went down, my heart was thumping. I made a nice curtsy and I got the doll back. So that's one of the earliest memories. Another one is that the doorbell rang and I ran to open the door, and an SS man came in, and I guess, well, I'm not very tall now, but I guess I went up to his waist and all dressed in black, you know, and he took his cap off and laid it on the table, and it had the skull and crossbones, and it was very frightening. And the reason he had come in was to hang a banner, an SS banner from our balcony down to the ground floor. So after that, we didn't play anymore there. Shortly after that, my father was summoned to the police station and accompanied by an SS man. When he left the house, he bumped into our mailman, who was a social democrat like my father. And mailman asked him, "Where are you going?" And Papa said, well, that he had been summoned. And so the mailman said, "Oh, I'll go with you." And pretty soon, the butcher, the grocer, the fruit guy, all of whom were patients of my father's, decided to go with him. And since this was in the early days, he was let go. But I think it's an example of how people did stick their necks out to help. My father's car was taken, requisitioned, but he still had to pay the maintenance and gas and the oil and everything. Jewish women were asked to remove signs from the sidewalk that had been painted there in oil. They were symbols of the old Austrian cross. They had to remove it with toothbrushes and water. And my mother always wore an apron in case she was summoned. But the neighbors said, "This is the doctor's wife," and they let her go. So lots of things like that. My father couldn't work anymore, so there was no way of earning a living. And people did start to disappear to Dachau. I think I'll leave you to talk, Robin, because I probably left out some stuff.
Okay. I just want to interject here that since I've met Hanni, my life has changed in so many wonderful ways. You have to know that she is a Renaissance woman. She hikes mountains, she does yoga, she plays piano, she taught German at Boston College till last year. She hosts international students in her home, and her home in Newton was designed by her husband, Hanni Myers, a prominent architect. She has 4 grown children and 8 grandchildren, and her friends are all ages and all backgrounds. She officiated at a wedding of 2 of her young friends. In what part of Spain was that, Hanni?
It was in Malaga, Spain.
Malaga, Spain. Yeah, it's an incredible woman. I just want you to know that. And your father had talked about America even before the Troubles began, right? What had he said about America?
Well, there was a little song that he would sing. He'd be in the rocking chair and we would sit on his lap, and it kind of went, I have to translate it. Sailors ahoy, there's a rock coming, a boulder, the ship is in danger, and then the danger was past, and then they said, and look beyond there, a land, America. So America was always something, you know. I did leave out stuff, of course, about what happened in Vienna, but I mean, such as the house searches. My father had to burn a good part of his library so that they wouldn't see particularly a journal. It's called Die Fackel, and it was somewhat left-wing. I told him about the car. We had a maid by the name of Minel, but servants couldn't stay with families if they were under 35 years old because they could be raped or something. So Mintle had to leave. We left her, but we still had to cook. My family was not very religious. We just went to the temple, I think, on the high holidays. But when Passover came that year, the curtains were drawn, and my father, who didn't speak any Hebrew, decided to have a Seder. And I do remember at the end, and Robin, you have to correct me, does it say something about next year in Jerusalem?
Yes.
So, yes, because he said next year in America.
In America.
So getting out of Vienna was not so easy. My father went to the American consulate immediately, the day after. He was very foresighted. But you needed all kinds of stuff. You needed an affidavit from someone who would vouch for you in the States. You had to get a quota number. You had to give a third of all your assets, where you had to pay an escape tax. You had to have an entry visa, a ship ticket, then there was a criminal check, military record, and so on and so forth. So when my father went to the American consulate, my father was born in Trieste, which before World War I was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So when the clerk asked where he was born in Trieste, and it's now Italian, she put us down as Italian, which really made it possible for us to leave because the Italian quota was not filled. So to this day, I'm wondering whether the clerk was just ignorant or did it on purpose. But we still didn't have the visa to come to the States. That somehow got lost. But my father decided we really needed to leave. So this was like the following September.
1938, right?
1938. So he, there was some exchange of money at the border because we were not legally allowed to cross into Italy. We left, I left something out that's in the book, Robin.
Yes.
About in the taxi on the way.
Yeah, here's the book, by the way.
Yeah, there's the
yeah, tell about the taxi and your promise to
on the way to the train when we left. I said to myself, when I'm twice as old as I am today, I will love my new city as much as I love Vienna. And so that's kind of the basis of this book, you know. We took the taxi to the South Station. We got into Italy. We stayed in Sorrento, waiting for the visa to come. We stayed there for 6 weeks. And then finally, were able to leave over through France, and we shipped in Le Havre in the SS Washington. We arrived in New York, and on the train to Boston, we looked out of the window and we saw all these houses that had collapsed and trees that had fallen down. We didn't know what happened. And so my father told Susie, who was the only one who spoke a little English, to go and ask the conductor. And she came back and she said, hurricane. But we didn't know what a hurricane was. But that was the famous 1938 hurricane, which is also why the passage in the ship was so very, very rough. Everybody was seasick. So coming to Boston, we first stayed in a rooming house in Brigham Circle. It was really, I hope it's not there anymore. It was very depressing. And I think it's the first time I really felt that I was homeless. My parents went out to look for a furnished apartment and eventually found something in Brighton. and we moved there. Went to the public school, the Harriet A. Baldwin School, where Robin and I actually were supposed to speak to the teachers and parents before all this COVID.
We will. We still will.
So I had had 2 years of school in Vienna, but the teachers then at that time had no concept that of children not speaking the language, and they just simply spoke louder. So then they put me in the 4th grade, so I never was in the 3rd, which I blame that for not being good in math. Let's see. Okay, so that's
Maybe this is a good time to read from the book, Hanni, what the section you wanted to read.
Do you want to read it?
No, you can read it.
Robin?
No.
Okay.
And I should say, people have asked us to talk a little about process. So we sat in Hanni's lovely house, and she would tell stories as she's telling now, and I would take notes. And somehow we put this into poetry because I'm a poet first. So you will hear the poems. Go ahead.
Big rhymes. I started 4th grade, but the words were all new. I didn't speak English. What would I do? I didn't know what the other children were saying. I didn't know how to play the games they were playing. The girls and boys would look at me and stare. They laughed and made fun of my clothes and hair. At home with Lily, I felt safe and sound, with Moni's cooking smell swirling all around. I learned English and made friends after a while. I played jacks and shadow tag and found reason to smile. So that's one page of this book. And I think it's, I mean, one of the reasons for writing the book is for children that have come from other countries now. And we talked, at one point, we talked to a group of kids at Newton North High School that were in a special class for English as a second language. And Robin, tell them, say a little about that. Because
there were students from China, Guatemala, Russia, Costa Rica, and they just lapped up Hanni's story, and they made so many parallels to their lives. The reasons that they had to leave their country, political, economic, crime, the fact that they came here and didn't speak English. Many of them were separated from their parents, came here. It was just amazing, the intergenerational connection. And some of these big young men would come up and hug Hanni. And they were very taken with the story of helpers, of people who helped the Jewish people in Austria and helpers over here. They said that they had people who helped them too. But remember what we asked them, Hanni?
Yes.
About a possession? You tell that.
Well, Robin was so good at engaging them, and she asked whether there were any possessions that they had had to leave behind. Isn't that what?
Yeah.
And so that brought up something, but also what they had brought over with them. Remember?
Yes.
There was one little girl that had some necklace or something.
Yeah, usually what they brought had a connection to the family, a grandparent, an aunt, uncle, jewelry, or some kind of talisman to keep them connected, which leads us right into Hanni's next theme about adapting to life in your new country, but still holding on to traditions and rituals and narrative story of your old country. Do you want to speak to that a little?
Well, I think you said that. I think that's something that I wanted these kids to know too, that when we came, we really tried to adapt and to assimilate, to whatever America was at that time, which I'm not sure today exactly, not the same. But at the same time retain the culture. So we all spoke German at home, and there's a pretty rich culture coming out of Austria, Germany at that time. Yeah, I think that was one of the points. The other point was voting. You remember?
Yeah.
Because my grandmother lived to be 103, and she went to vote each time, always. My grandmother came with her, she was my mother's mother, and she went to night school for 10 years to learn English, to learn the American, the Constitution of the United States, and United States history. And one time when she was 100, she was coming back from voting, and my father said, "So, Mother, whom did you vote for?" And she said, "The American Constitution says that that's a private matter." So she was,
Feisty lady.
yeah.
I should also mention that Hanni's father helped to rescue and save 17 families from Austria by finding sponsors in this country. And Hanni's sister, Susie, who became a doctor, put together this book called Dear Otto, with letters of appeal from friends and relatives and strangers, right, in Austria. And Hanni's father did his utmost to help those people leave. But of course, there was your family in Czechoslovakia, right, Hanni?
Yeah, well, my father said to them, all my grandmother's family, all in Czechoslovakia, my father said to them, you need to get out. And they said, "Oh, no, Hitler will never come here." So they all perished in Auschwitz, except for one cousin who managed to survive, go to Australia. Yeah.
So to talk a little about our collaboration, we had a lot of fun. There's probably more that's out of the book than we put into the book, but could you just talk a little about Mrs. Sullivan? I love that story.
Which one?
Mrs. Sullivan, your sixth grade
Mrs.
teacher.
Sullivan?
Yeah.
Well, there's always a teacher that kind of changes your life course. And Mrs. Sullivan in the sixth grade did that for me because she suggested to my parents that I should go to girls' Latin school rather than to Brighton High. And I think that did change my life. Yeah.
And we wanted to touch on a little tonight, Hanni, issues of social justice, the whole Black Lives Matter movement now, COVID and the inequities that we're seeing and the way the disease is affecting different people. And unfortunately, you found out how quickly life can change in one day, and how all of a sudden people can be labeled the other or the enemy or not native. Given your experience of all these years, what are your thoughts? And now I should also add that Hanni's family is very multicultural. Hanni's family is like the new American family with children adopted from different countries and different religions. It's fascinating. So what do you say to the younger generation, to this country?
Oh my goodness, that's a big question, Robin.
I know.
I have to think about it.
Okay. I remember when we spoke at Newton North, Amy Worth, the wonderful teacher, said that as much as we revered the Statue of Liberty, many of her students didn't feel that way. They didn't feel that they were welcomed. They didn't feel that this country was embracing everyone. And that was very sad to hear. And I think that's something that we all have to work on in this country, because the richness of immigrants here, I was thinking that pre-COVID, I loved to run errands in Newtonville. And in one day in Newtonville, I had interactions with people from, and these weren't that their parents were from these countries, they were from these countries: Sri Lanka, Japan, Brazil, Uganda, South Africa, all right here in Newton. These were people living and working in Newton and making our society so rich, the tapestry of our lives so rich here with immigrants. Oh, and Hanni, could you tell the story about your friend who used to go to the movies with you?
Well, when we moved into 127 Washington Street, the furnished apartment in Brighton, an Austrian family was just moving out, and they were old timers because they'd been here for 6 weeks already, so they could tell us a lot of things. And there were two sons, and they were exactly the same ages as my sister and I. So every Saturday afternoon, we went to the movies at the Egyptian Theater in Brighton Center. And my mother thought it was children's movies, but it wasn't at all. Except we had to go back each week because there was a serial, The Hawk of the Wilderness. And at the end of each episode, he was about to die in some kind of way. And we had to go the next week to make sure he was still alive. So I think that helped to learn English. And I also wanted to say that, as a child, it's so easy to learn a foreign language. It took me exactly 6 weeks, and I could speak. First 6 weeks in school, I didn't open my mouth, except to say, I understand, which I thought meant I don't understand. So then the problem started all the more. But after that time, I spoke. I think it's good for kids to learn a foreign language early. So much easier. Yeah.
Yeah, and Hanni's working on translating our book into German and Italian.
Yeah, but I can't rhyme that, but the German.
I should also say that we were really fortunate because Hanni had photographs, original family photographs of Vienna and then of Boston, thus our title, My Two Cities. And as I mentioned, Hanni has friends of every age, of every occupation. So she just happened to have a friend, Patricia Nisoff, who's a graphic designer, who put the book together for us and did a wonderful job. What else did we want to talk about?
The attitude of some people that came here, at the same time we did. Some people said it was better in the old country. Well, of course it was better before Hitler came. But some people just rejected everything, they didn't want to speak German anymore or anything. So this goes back to what I was saying, that to take what's best from the new country, but still maintain the culture. And I think that's important. Living here in the first years, it wasn't that easy. I mean, my father learned English and he passed the medical board so he could practice medicine again. My mother worked in one of the, I think it was Temple Sinai, had a clothing exchange where mostly children's clothes that were outworn would be left there and others could pick up. And she worked there for a long time. And of course, they were so involved in helping other families get out. And I think my sister and I were busy adjusting to school. We didn't appreciate at all what they were doing. I just realized it, after reading Susie's book.
Can you show your suitcase, Hanni?
Oh, yeah, hold on. This is, yeah. So my father put green stripes on the suitcases so we could recognize them, because there were 13 suitcases that came with. But we really couldn't bring many toys. I mean, I had Lily and I had some little wooden animals that I liked to play with. And I guess we had books and clothing, yeah.
Could you say something about what we put in the book, what you left behind, your ball of silver wrappers?
Well, I had a collection of, the candy, the chocolates would be wrapped in silver paper. Well, now it's very common. I mean, we have the tin foil, but I had a big ball already of silver paper, and then also had a collection of transfer tickets from the streetcar and the bus. I had to leave those behind. That was very sad. And of course, our beloved cook, who was like a nanny to us. Yeah, felt easy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
And the kitchen table, you had a round kitchen table and everything happened around that table, and you were able to bring that table eventually, right?
Yes, yes. Well, what happened was after a while, the cook from Easy and the mailman, they were able uh, to send some of our furniture over, and as well as the grand piano, the Brusendorf. The only thing missing was my mother's silver. The Nazis took that. Yeah, yeah.
And I know you're going to get this question, so maybe we'll wrap up with this. Have you gone back to Vienna?
Yes, I have several times. The first time I went back was in 1951, 52, just at that New Year's, and the city was bombed out. It was full of ruins. It was terrible. The weather was bad. It was very depressing. And the only person, I wanted to see Frau Lisi, the cook, and she lived in the Russian zone, which we were not supposed to go with an American passport, but I did anyway. But yeah, that was bad. But I've been back since, and in fact, I was there just before the outbreak of the pandemic. I went with the Boston College Chorale, and we were in Salzburg and Vienna, and I went back to the apartment house. I got in, but I didn't get into the apartment. The woman that lives there was not at home, so I didn't do that.
So I'm going to wrap up before questions with saying it's so important to tell these stories. It's important for your own family to know. It's important for the world to know. It's important for new immigrants to know. And don't wait till it's too late. So many of us never asked our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and neighbors to tell their stories to us. So we'll speak a little bit about that. But I have to ask you, Hanni, you made that promise when you were 8 years old.
Oh,
You
yeah.
said you would love your new city as
When
much
I was 16.
as 16. And
Yes,
did,
I
that,
thought you did. Yes.
did you? Did you come to love Boston?
Yes. Yes.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. I think Lily's going to field some questions or comments for us.
Yes, thank you so much, Hanni and Robin. And we do have some questions. Let me just start. So our first one from Miriam is, when you first came to the United States, why did you come to Boston?
Oh, because the person that had sent us the affidavit was a colleague of my father's from medical school, and he lived in Boston. That's why we came to Boston.
And there's a question from Amelia asking, did you lose your native language, or did you feel pressure not to speak in German?
No, we always spoke German at home, and I maintained that. I'm glad I did, although I'm probably missing a lot of the current vocabulary. Has to do with computers.
Mm-hmm. And there is a question from Liz asking, Hanni, you mentioned that your sister wrote a book as well, and she just wanted to know the title of that.
Oh, yes.
The Book of Letters. And
It's Dear Otto, and if you contact me, we can give information on that book as well. It was published by the University of Vermont Holocaust Studies Center, which was fascinating. I didn't know that there was one, and we're going to try to do something with our book with them as well.
Yeah, my sister's book is really interesting. I mean, she picked out just a few families and followed all the, bureaucracy that went into all the letters that went back and forth with the Red Cross and this and that. Yeah, it's a very good book.
I have a question for you. You talked a little bit about it, but I'd love to hear just some more of your reflections on preserving and recording this personal history, because I think a lot of people, especially these days, might be thinking about, wanting to preserve or record, their experiences. So if you have advice for how you went about it or how you thought about, recording all of your history.
Even before we did the book, I had written down some memories and so on. I have an informal kind of autobiography that I've given to my kids. Yeah, I think it's important. I wish that, I knew something about my grandmother, but I think it's really important. Yeah.
I can post or send people a list of questions to start asking people. Instead of saying, tell me about your life, you say, who were your friends when you were little? What did you play with? Do you remember a favorite dress? So very specific questions, and don't make it intimidating, just make a conversation. Have a tape recorder if you're comfortable and your relative is comfortable with that. You'll find that as people talk, it sparks more memories and sparks more questions for you. And it really brings generations closer together, because grandchildren say things like, well, I'm artistic like you are artistic, and things that you don't really know. And as Hanni mentioned, the sacrifices. I think as Americans, we don't really understand the depth of sacrifices that parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, and today, of course, we're being tried in that realm again. But so I think just opening a conversation and being interested. I want to know about you. I want to know. Photos help.
Yes, well, I have so many photograph albums, but now everything is on the computer, right? I like albums.
A few more questions now. So Dorothy is asking, did your parents have siblings? And so were they able to leave?
My mother had a brother, and my father was instrumental in getting an affidavit for them to come. My father had an older brother who immigrated to Canada before we came, yeah. And a sister who, they went to France, and actually the husband was interned in France, in southern France, the Pétain. And they came to New York eventually, yes. But it's my grandmother's sister and that whole family that didn't make it, that perished, that were from Czech Republic, yeah.
We have a comment from Amelia, plus a question, but just wanting to say this is so relevant to children coming into our country now, and thanking you for telling this story.
Thank you. I want to mention that Hanni and I had a full roster for May and June. We were going to speak in libraries, schools, temples, churches, senior citizens places, and we would be delighted to do that on Zoom. So if any of you out there have organizations or individual families, people you think would be interested in hearing our story, we would be delighted to share, and we could tailor our talk to your particular interests.
And if you have grandchildren, anybody, I think it's a great little present, So if people really like this book, Robin.
And it gets you talking about your own family. So.
Yeah. I think and another thing that I thought was important really was the voting, because it says 5 years later, we became proud citizens of the USA. Until her 100th birthday, Moni, that's my grandmother, voted each election day. And when I turned 16, the promise I had made came true. I left Vienna and Boston, my two cities, old and new. We had made a new home in Boston with our whole family, there was Mutti Papa, Susie, Moni, my doll Lily, and me. That's the end of the
Yeah.
But Robin did such a great job writing that.
We would sit there and try to think of rhymes and how to present things and what was age appropriate. And we would read it over and over again and call each other. It was a labor of love, and it was so wonderful doing it with Hanni. By the way, if anyone has an idea for a next project, we're looking for our next project. And we would be happy to help people put together their family stories.
That's actually leading us to quite a few more questions that just came in. So I'm going to continue with these. So Vivian is asking, is this program being recorded? I can answer that. Yes, it is being recorded, and it will go up on the library's YouTube page. So
Thank you.
we'll have that available. Let's see, Faye asks, have you considered a second book? Like you were just saying.
Robin.
Yes. We were actually thinking about doing something about grandparents, the modern grandparent, and grandparents as role models and grandparents. I know some of my friends are out there who are grandparents. The role that grandparents play in children's lives, we're thinking about that. We also were thinking of doing something with the new immigrants who are here in the Newton, Brookline, Brighton area, and telling some of the stories of young people from all different areas of the globe. And I don't know what Hanni has up her sleeve.
No, well, I think a lot of people now stay in their own little group without trying to learn English. And I understand that. It's more comforting, you know, to be with your own people, but I still think it's important to learn English. I mean, America used to be a melting pot. I'm not sure it still is. Yeah.
We gotta stir the pot.
Yeah.
And vote and take responsibility.
Yeah.
There's Andrea is asking, how did the two of you meet? Maybe discuss this a little.
There was the Newton Festival of the Arts, which has been going for many years with dance and music and storytelling and art. And I heard Hanni telling her story. I had organized the event, and I looked at this woman. Did you have Lily with you at that?
I can't remember.
I don't know if you had Lily, but the last line of Hanni's story was, 80 years later, I still have Lily. And I said to my friend sitting next to me, that's a book, that's a story. So I tracked her down, and the rest is history.
But then didn't we just bump into each other at the
library? Yes, I wanted to mention the importance of libraries in all our lives. I grew up across the street from the library in Jackson Heights, Queens, and I spent the better part of my childhood there or bringing books home from there. And before I had a chance to call you, we bumped into each other in the Newton Library. So we said it was beshert, it was fate that we should do this book.
It's good. Talking on Zoom is so weird because I can't see
I wish we could see everybody, but we know you're there. And Lily, thank you again for putting this all together. And we urge people to look at other programs that Brookline Library is having online for adults and children, right?
Yes, actually, since we got a question both about how to get a copy of the book, I'm going to paste that in again. So you can write to Robin and get a copy directly from her. And I will also put in our calendar of library programs as well. I do want to mention, because we do have a program that's coming up that's very much related to what we're talking about here. We're going to have a workshop on how to record StoryCorps interviews. You may have heard of StoryCorps or heard StoryCorps segments on public radio. It's basically an oral history project where anyone and everyone is welcome to have an informal interview conversation with someone in their life. And since the pandemic began, StoryCorps has come up with a new sort of platform that lets you record remotely, so people can record and have these conversations today to discuss current events or just any life history. So if you have been thinking about wanting to record your stories, then we'll be having a workshop on how you can do that on this program, on this platform as well. I will put that down into the chat so you will have that documented.
That's great. That's great. I just want to say the importance of stories now, whether it's stories about the pandemic, stories about social justice. It's through stories that we have our humanity. Numbers are hard to digest, but when you hear an individual story and different viewpoints of that same story, that's when we start to connect and empathize and hopefully work together in this country.
Just typing these in. We did have another question. Looks like we have a little bit more time, so feel free to keep sending in questions. So Hanni, this is for you from Deborah. Wondering if you have any surviving relatives who also came over in the 30s.
Oh, surviving. Oh, I think everybody's kind of dying off. No, unfortunately, my sister passed away. No, I think I don't. But the daughter of the one cousin who actually escaped, who was in Auschwitz and was part of the death march and survived. She lives in, the daughter lives in Australia, and I'm sort of in touch with her through email. Yeah, because, yeah.
Hanni has this dynasty of children and grandchildren and all the young people who have lived in her house when they come over. Loads of musicians, Hanni.
Yes.
She always has these super good-looking young men in her house.
That's true.
And talented as well.
Yes. Yes.
I had another question for you as well. You had mentioned just in your process of talking and I guess interviewing or just your conversations that you would start with these little details or ask about their daily life, and I wondered if there were any sort of surprising things that came up, or maybe something that wound up in the book that you wouldn't have originally thought would be in the book.
In the book, did we have some?
Well, we have the Ferris wheel. I think this book has a lot of round symbols. The kitchen table, the Ferris wheel in Vienna. We didn't really talk about your friends, Goethe. Were there surprises?
Yeah. Surprises that came out in the book. No, I think that there were surprises maybe that we didn't put into the book, I mean, there were things like during the war, I remember we were considered enemy aliens. And
in this country, you were.
This country. And so I was riding on the bus with my grandmother, started speaking German. I said, don't speak German, Then she started speaking English. I said, don't speak English, because she had such an accent. That's my grandmother, yeah.
Yeah, I think we were surprised. I was surprised by how much Hanni remembered and how pure the memories were as a child and how innocent, riding home on the streetcar. Why do those men have their lapels turned? What are, she was so protected. She was so secure in that country. And then the horrible surprise of the change, I think.
Yeah. One of the things that really struck us when we first came to Boston, I think we're going for a walk and must have been Cleveland Circle, and we saw all these young people just fighting, falling over each other, and it turned out to be American football. we said, what kind of a country is this?
And we still say what kind of a country. But you celebrated Thanksgiving. That was a big holiday for you here.
Yes, yes. I don't know. Well, my grandmother went to the store to buy almonds to make an almond cake, and she took her dictionary. But the first translation for almond is tonsils. Okay, so she asked for a pound of tonsils. And luckily, there were two elderly ladies there that spoke Yiddish, and they knew what it was close enough to German, so they helped her. And those ladies kind of became our fairy godmothers, you know. And a lot of people were good to us when we came. Yeah. Yeah.
It looks like our Q&A is winding down. So I just wanted to thank you both again for joining us and for recording this wonderful story and telling it to us. This has just truly been a pleasure to hear. I wonder if you wanted to say any thoughts before we wrap up for today.
Oh, thank you for coming. It's just a new experience, you know, with this Zoom thing. So I don't know.
I wanted to thank all our friends and family who supported us in writing this book, and a lot of my friends who were on, who knew me when I was always scribbling my stories in school. And everyone has a story to tell, and don't ever belittle your own story. There is something to be learned and to be shared and to be felt by communing and communicating. And thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
It's a lovely place to end. I wish we could hear everyone's applause, but I guess we'll just have to have virtual applause. So thank you so much again, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. Stay
Good night,
cool.
everyone.